We are joined here in the studio by Simon Marks. He is President and Chief Correspondent for Feature Story News. And joining us from Edinburgh is James Mitchell. He is a professor with the Politics and International Relations School at the University of Edinburgh. Welcome to both of you to the show. So, Simon, as you pointed out, the pollsters were simply interpreting the information that they were receiving. Does that mean then that the people who went into the election booths to cast their vote were undecided right up to the point where they put that X down?
Well, I think there's a couple of different possibilities here, and there is an inquiry, by the way, that's being conducted by an independent group in the UK into how the polling organisations got it so wrong, an inquiry in which many American polling organisations will have considerable interest as we head here towards 2016. It's possible they didn't make their minds up until the last moment. It's possible that British people just like messing with pollsters and not actually telling them how they plan to vote. And it's possible that there were simple changes on the campaign trail in those last few days. Remember, Ed Miliband, the leader of the Labour Party, had what was considered by most observers to be a fairly disastrous final televised debate appearance, and it may well have been that in the last couple of days there were just shifting sands there.
What does this result tell us about what the British people want, or what they don't want?
Well, I think it tells the Labour Party that what the British people want is, as Tony Blair, the former Prime Minister, said in the hours after the election, a party that is able to articulate aspiration. The Labour Party message came off, particularly in those last few days, as being profoundly anti-business and somewhat anti-aspiration. And so party grandees are urging the Labour Party now to go back and consider, as it prepares to elect a new leader, what sort of political message it wants to present to the public. This was also an extraordinary condemnation of the Liberal Democratic Party, which had been in coalition with David Cameron. And the real seismic nature of this election is not just that Cameron won it, but that he's now able to form a majority government without the Liberal Democrats, who were just annihilated in this election. And they didn't see it coming, and I don't think any of us did.
Professor Mitchell, how big a challenge will it be for David Cameron to keep the United Kingdom together? Scotland, as we know, has already been asking for devolved powers right now. Nicola Sturgeon saying she wants control over welfare and tax. Let's take a listen to what Cameron had to say.
Governing with respect means recognising that the different nations of our United Kingdom have their own governments as well as the United Kingdom government. Both are important. And indeed, with our plans, the governments of these nations will become more powerful with wider responsibilities. In Scotland, our plans are to create the strongest devolved government anywhere in the world.
So, Professor Mitchell, can he keep it together?
Well, it's going to be a major challenge for the Prime Minister. One has to remember that the Conservatives only have one Member of Parliament in Scotland. Their share of the vote is the lowest they've ever achieved in Scotland. And so the Conservatives will be pursuing a policy agenda that is very much at variance with what the Scottish people have voted for. So I think there's a major challenge ahead. The SNP has made it very clear that they do not see this election as a mandate for independence or even a mandate for another referendum. So there is time, but it's a time during which the Prime Minister will have to think very, very hard about how he engages with Scotland. I don't think any Prime Minister has found him or herself in such a difficult situation as Mr Cameron finds himself today with regard to Scotland.
Simon, the leader of the Scottish Nationalist Party, Nicola Sturgeon, probably had the biggest time of her life after this election result was announced. She wasn't even running for a seat. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
I think historic is one of these words that's often overused, but actually in these circumstances I'm not sure it even quite covers it. You know, the tectonic plates of Scottish politics shifted yesterday. This is a massive, massive result. We saw some swings that, you know, have never been seen before in the history of Westminster politics.
So, question is, are we going to see another referendum pretty soon? And are we looking at Scottish independence being inevitable?
I mean, I will bow to the professor's expertise on whether we see another referendum soon, but I don't really see how it's avoidable. I mean, this was such a landslide by the Scottish National Party, and they are going to keep making the case now in the bully pulpit of the House of Commons. The Labour Party's leader will still formally be the leader of the opposition, but with just shy of 60 seats in the Parliament, 1 seat in 10 basically, they're going to have an enormous voice there literally an enormous voice there. I do think there's a challenge, though, here for Nicola Sturgeon. I mean, one wonders whether it was wise for her not to seek a parliamentary seat, because there's something unprecedented going on here where you have a political party leader who is not sitting in the legislature. And Alex Salmond, the man who led the battle for Scottish independence in the last referendum, he's there at Westminster, and it's going to be very interesting to see how the two of them calibrate that relationship.
Professor, what is Scotland's strongest argument for independence, and would it be a viable nation outside of the United Kingdom?
I think everyone accepts it would be viable, just whether the Scots would be better or worse off. I mean, even those who are opposed to independence have been fairly clear about that. At the moment, I think the strongest argument, the argument the SNP are certainly putting forward, is that the Scottish people want something very different from that which is going to be pursued over the following years by the Conservatives. So it's a political difference that really is dividing the UK, Conservatives governing in London and an SNP government headed by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon in Edinburgh. So I think that is the key, and I think that's a very difficult divide for the Prime Minister to handle.
Simon, the other big issue for David Cameron, that is membership of the European Union. He says he wants a referendum to go to the British people whether they want to stay in Europe. Is that a gamble on his part?
Oh, it's a huge gamble, but it's a gamble that politically he was forced to take before the election because of the new upstart UK Independence Party that emerged on the scene. And, you know, it is worth pointing out that Britain's first past the post winner-takes-all voting system has been a disaster for the UK Independence Party. They secured the votes of 4 million people in last Thursday's election. They came second in well over 100 individual districts around the country. They ended up with 1 member of parliament in Westminster. They politically had forced David Cameron to the right to say, OK, we'll do this in or out referendum. It's going to be very difficult for him to walk back from that pledge now.
And the big issue on that is immigration.
Well, immigration and also the role that Brussels plays in Britain on a daily basis. I mean, various European Union commissioners and commission presidents have always been tremendous figures of fun and figures of hate for the Fleet Street newspapers. Brussels being over there trying to impact behaviour here. UKIP certainly put the focus on this immigration issue, but there are other issues at play that boil down to British sovereignty over issues that many Britons believe the government should play a lead role in legislating.
Professor Mitchell, here we have people in England who are concerned and want to take another look at Britain's membership in the European Union. What about Scotland? If Scotland does go the route of independence, will it want to remain in the European Union?
Well, the polls would suggest that the Scots are more in favour of the EU than the rest of the United Kingdom. And of course, if we do have a referendum across the UK, as seems almost certain now, it's quite possible that the rest of the United Kingdom will vote to leave, while the Scots will vote to remain in the EU. And now that, I think, would certainly create a demand for a second independence referendum here. So the EU referendum is very much tied up with the domestic constitution, with Scotland's constitutional future. So yes, I think it is quite important to look at the component parts of the United Kingdom and the different attitudes that certainly prevail at this moment.
But there is also this issue of whether, you know, regardless of whether Scotland wanted to stay in the EU or not, whether the EU would have Scotland, whether it meets the membership criteria that would apply in an environment after you've been through the situation that you've been through in Greece, Spain and other member states. So I think, you know, this is a very, very big issue. It's not a one-way question of whether the Scots want in. It's also a question of whether Brussels wants Scotland.
You see, that's absolutely correct, though I don't think there's any doubt at all about the criteria. The Scotland certainly meets all the criteria for membership. It's a political question whether places like Spain would be keen to allow an independent Scotland into the EU, given that it may create a precedent and a problem for Spain. But certainly in terms of its economy, its democracy and such like, there's no doubt whatsoever that Scotland meets the criteria. The wisdom, the view across Europe is probably it would be allowed in, but not necessarily immediately. So there would be a kind of period potentially between Scotland voting for independence and then having to apply to join. There's great debates on this, but ultimately I think it's not so much a legal issue, it's a political issue.
Would there also be a question mark, Simon, over the role that Scotland would play in NATO? Britain's nuclear submarine fleet is based in Scotland, the Trident submarines, and the Scottish are not too happy about that. They also say they will cut back on defence spending.
It's a big issue, and in as much as this election campaign in Britain, I think, caused concern at the White House, that concern was rightly focused on coalition negotiations that we all thought were going to take place and what their impact could have been on the British foreign policy with regard to its relationship with the US. But the future of Scotland raises equally as many questions that would be troubling, if not for the Obama administration, then certainly for its successor, should there be another referendum on Scottish independence. I mean, the Obama administration has already been concerned that Britain is not in a position economically to deliver in a full way on the military commitments that it's made towards Iraq, Afghanistan, the battle against Islamic State. Any discussion about the foreign policy future of a relationship between London and Edinburgh has the potential to add further wrinkles to that conversation.
Right, and very quickly, Simon, few seconds left in this part of the show. Would Washington be sleeping a little bit more comfortably right now that David Cameron has got in?
I think they'll be sleeping more comfortably over the short term, given David Cameron's victory, stability, no need for uncertainty with regards to a coalition. But those medium-term questions about Scotland and Britain's continued membership of the EU, they have to be worrying them in the back of their minds.